Coming week is Chuseok holiday in Korea. It's one of the biggest traditional holidays in Korea, an occasion to mark the end of summer and make a little pause before the harvest season starts. It is celebrated in many other East Asian countries too, as the Moon Festival in China, Tsukimi in Japan, or Taetsungdo, forgive my pronunciation, in Vietnam. It's a day of tradition, family bond, and lineage, and in the sense, I made it a routine on my channel to read stories from old Korea in Chuseok holiday week. This time too, most stories are from the last dynasty, Joseon, which lasted for 500 years between 1392 and 1910. It was not only very long, but also extensively documented period in Korean history, meaning lots of stories to tell. One story is said to have taken place at the end of the previous dynasty, Korea, but well, let's not get too pedantic. I collected mainly various local myths and tales, but the last story is based on actual historic records. So here are 5 stories from the old Korea. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by a host. Anthony. There are numerous islands off the coast of Muan, a port town on southwestern coast. One of them is small island called Kaksisam, Bride's Island, because on a rainy day, the silhouette of the island against the grey horizon resembles that of a bride with her wedding headdress on. There's a sad myth regarding the island. Once upon a time, on a coastal village lived a young married couple. They were simple people and poor, but deeply loved each other and were content with their life together. But since one day, the husband got ill and got worse by day. Desperate wife searched for a way to cure his mysterious illness, but no doctor and no medicine seemed to have any effect. One day, an old lady from neighborhood paid a visit to console distraught wife. Before she left, the old woman mumbled, more to herself, "Looks like the only hope is..." The wife caught her passing comment and hung on to the old neighbor. What is the only hope? Please do tell me," young woman pleaded. The old woman reluctantly said, "Do you see those islands over there?" "You mean 7 peaks?" The group of 7 rocky islands were nicknamed so by the locals. "Yes. On the smallest of those 7, it's said to grow a magical medicinal plant that can cure the most persistent illness." "Really? I'll go and get it if that's true." "You are not the only one who thought that, but nobody ever came back from the island." "If my love be deep and true, heaven shall pity me and guide me through." The young woman was dead set. She made a pot of porridge for her husband and told him that she found where she could get a medicine for him. "I'll come back as soon as possible. Have this porridge and hang on till I'm back." It took her half the day till she reached the little island. The horizon and the entire island seemed on a blaze in the red sunset. She searched high and low for that mysterious plant, and as the red sunset quickly faded into darkness, she saw a flowering plant on the edge of the cliff. That must be it. She was overjoyed, enough to forget all the hunger and exhaustion. But when she turned around with a priceless herb in her hand, what she faced was a big snake snarling at her. Young woman stepped aside to get around. But it was no use. There was yet another snake, and then another. Soon she was surrounded by numerous snakes. She fell on the ground and got bitten by one of them. She let out a scream and passed out. When she got around again, her mind was still set to bring the plant to her husband. But she couldn't get up, because her legs were now turned into the tail of a snake. Meanwhile, a few days passed back at home. The husband looked out to sea day and night, waiting for his wife, even forgetting to eat the porridge she made for him. His condition quickly deteriorated and died. Following day, rain poured down. Villagers who looked out to the sea noticed the smallest of the 7 islands looking somewhat different than usual, like a shy lady sitting on the wavy sea. People gathered on the shore, gazing and wondering about the weird phenomenon, when they saw something approaching across the sea. It was a giant snake, with some sort of plant in its mouth. People were startled and all stepped aside, but the snake seemed to pay no attention to the commotion, and wiggled to the small hut once reaching the shore. Not long after, the snake came out and swarmed back to the island. Villagers checked in the hut and found the young husband dead all alone, and the plant left on his side. Since then, the island took the shape of a woman on rainy days, and people named it Bride's Island in remembrance of the unfortunate wife. In the slope of Myeongji Mountain, Gapyeong-gun, Gyeonggi Province, there used to be a particular tomb that was called the Head Tomb. It belonged to a man named Chung Chi-il, who lived during the reign of the first king of Joseon dynasty. The Chung family used to be powerful and wealthy in the previous dynasty, Korea. But as the power and social structure shifted into the new dynasty, they lost it all. And by then they had to worry what to feed themselves day to day. Chung Chi-il, the patriarch of the family, tried to rebuild the family by entering into government office, but he always failed to pass the test for a governmental post. One day, Chung Chi-il talked to his younger brother.
I've long been praying to the god of the mountain to save our family. I think my prayer was not answered because I didn't make a proper offering. We are too poor to find a worthy offering, so I decided to sacrifice myself.
His brother jumped and told him not to talk about such a nonsense. But anyway, had to give his word that he would keep it a secret from other members of the family. A few months passed. One day, Chung Chi-il was seen going into the mountain in his best outfit and didn't come back home. His brother remembered what Chung Chi-il said a few months back and led other family members into the mountain in search for his older brother. And about the slope of the mountain, they ran into a huge tiger approaching, holding something in its mouth. It was Chung Chi-il's head. Tiger put the head on the sunny side under a big pine tree, neatly combed Chung Chi-il's hair with its tongue, and went away. The family was shocked. They tried to pick up the head to bring back home, but then the tiger appeared again and blocked their way. In the end, they had to bury the head at the spot where the tiger pointed. Since the tragedy, the fortune of the Chung family turned around. One good news followed another, and they quickly recovered the lost family wealth, as well as producing many a high-ranking government officer down the generations. Apparently, where Changchil's head was buried was the most fortunate burial plot according to feng shui. It's a kind of a village myth that my granny recounted to me. The story goes back to the time of Cheongjo, the 22nd king of Joseon dynasty between 1776 and 1800. In my granny's town is a royal tomb that belongs to Cheongjo's father, a royal prince who was sacrificed in the political game and conflict with his father, the king. Cheongjo was very much devoted to the memory of his late father who died tragically, which translated into paying lots of care for his tomb. So naturally there was a dedicated tomb keeper assigned by the name of Kong. One day, Kong happened to run into an old Buddhist monk, and he said,
"Death is written in your fate. In a mere fortnight."
The tomb keeper was shocked and begged the monk to help him. But the monk replied,
"I've already broken the rule of the heaven by spilling the matter of life and death. You'd better accept the fate and spend what little time remains with your family,"
and went away. Effectively being sentenced to death, the tomb keeper couldn't hide his distraught state from his wife, and ended up telling her everything. The wife contemplated a bit and told her husband to stay calm and carry on doing his job as usual. For 5 nights, the wife was seen offering a prayer. Kong, the tomb keeper, appreciated wife's heart, but was also let down because despite the calm reception, his wife had no solution either. From the 6th day, the wife was then seen taking rice out from their storage and going around the town. Another 5 days like that, and the rice storage almost went bare. And then, wife disappeared, carrying anything of value left in the house with her. Tomb keeper was in despair. Not only his days were numbered, but his wife abandoned him too. On the 14th day, rain poured down, and wife came back home barehanded. Was she back to check if her husband was really dead or not? Despair turned into rage, and tomb keeper started beating his wife. And wife took it without any excuse or explanation. In the end, what was the use of punishing his wife? Shouldn't he be at least thankful now there would be at least somebody to keep his side at his last moment? But as soon as he stopped beating, wife jumped up and rushed out. Tomb keeper didn't know what was up with her, but just followed her in the rain. Where wife ended up was the royal tomb. She dropped over the mound of the tomb and started bewailing. Again, tomb keeper didn't understand the situation, but anyway was taken over by the overwhelming emotion. He too dropped over the tomb and joined his wife, crying. When the couple picked themselves up and came back home, what was waiting for them was a gift and praise from the king himself. What was happening? Well, wife alone knew what she was doing. For the first 5 days, she contemplated what to do. She knew that she had to find the old monk, but it wasn't an easy task to pin down a wandering monk. Buddhist monks often go around town to town to get donations from people, from a humble meal to money. Since he already refused to help her husband out, she speculated he wouldn't come back around her home. So she went out first around her neighbors, donating rice to any passing monk, and asked to save her husband. The task took her further and further away, until she finally ran into the very old monk who predicted her husband's death. She desperately begged for help. Her dedication moved the monk's heart, and he parted away to save her husband. That she should donate all her belonging to Buddha, and on the 14th day, take her husband to the royal tomb and cry there all day long together. But there was one condition, as often is with any old fairy tales, that she had to do this all without explaining it to her husband. So she had to plan everything carefully to make her husband do what he had to do without understanding what was happening. So she feigned to run away, so she endured his beating. What happened on that rainy day was, the king happened to be visiting the area. As a devoted son as he was to his late father, he was concerned about the condition of his father's tomb in the pouring rain. He dispatched an officer to check on the tomb keeper. Should he be not fulfilling his duty and stayed home rather than tending the royal tomb, the officer was to bring back the tomb keeper's head. When the officer arrived at tomb keeper's home, it was empty. When he then went to check on the royal tomb, he found the tomb keeper and his wife crying there, covering the royal tomb with their body. The king took it as his loyal subjects protecting his father's tomb and was deeply impressed. Hence a big royal prize and praise for the tomb keeper and his wife. In the last years of Korea dynasty, that would be in about 14th century, there was a little town called Pisingul in Jeju Island, the biggest island of Korea off the southern coast. Amongst the residents was a particularly beautiful young woman, and among her admirers was a guy who was a bit of a simpleton. He had a crush on her a big time, but having not much of prospects, he couldn't dare to make an advance, and meanwhile she married to another guy from the neighboring town. The crush now turned into a bitter desperation. The simpleton managed to get friendly with the woman's husband, and one day lured him to go hunting together deep in the forest, where he killed the unsuspecting man and buried him under a tree. The woman was of course devastated. It was not even a year since they married, and her husband went missing with no trace and no context. In the following sad and frustrated years as a practical widow, the simpleton guy introduced himself as an earnest and selfless friend to her. In the end, it moved the woman's heart, and she married the killer of her husband. The life together was simple but content. She gave birth every year, and 7 years passed with the 7 children. One day, rain poured down too much to work on the field or go hunting, so the simpleton guy stayed home. He stared at the dripping water from eaves bubbling on the ground, and then giggled for some reason. His wife saw it and wondered. "We lost a day because of this heavy rain, and you seem so happy for some reason," she said.
It's nothing, just silly,"
he said, but he still couldn't help himself from bursting into giggles. It only made his wife more curious, and she kept asking him. In the end, the man opened his mouth.
"It's just... Those bubbling water reminds me of how the blood bubbled when I cut the throat of your first husband.
Blood ran cold in the woman's heart. Scenes of the past 7 years flickered in her mind, but she quickly gathered herself and casually said, "Wow, so that's what happened. I've been just wondering all these years. So, where did you do that?" That way, she managed to convince the murderer to open up where he buried the body of his victim. Following day, the woman excused herself to gather firewood in the forest and digged up the remains of her first husband. She went straight to the local authority with a proof. "I just found out my husband killed my first husband and manipulated me to marry him. In ignorance, I lived with him and served as my husband for the past 7 years and gave birth to 7 children. Please, kill him and the 7 children of his," she pleaded. "I understand he deserved death, but kids have no part in this," the governor persuaded. "But they are from his dirty seed. I shudder to think they may grow up just as deviant. Please, kill them all," the woman insisted. In the end, she saw her husband and 7 children executed. Then she digged up a cave under the ground, squeezed herself in, and asked her neighbors to block up the entrance, as if she couldn't stand seeing the light of the day any longer. Some thought she was a righteous one who sought justice for her dead husband. Others thought she was heartless for having her kids dead. Her sad story survived even after the town itself disappeared on the map, and the later generations nicknamed her as Mego Halmang, the granny who buried herself. As I mentioned in the intro, Chuseok holiday is the day to celebrate and taste the first harvest of the year after the summer's hard work, characterized by the sense of joy and abundance. But my channel being what it is, I bring you one chapter of the history that is totally on the opposite end of that. Probably one of the most disastrous year in the 500-year-long history of Joseon dynasty. 2 terrible years between 1670 and 1671. Bang on from the first day of 1670, unusual solar halo of red and blue hue was observed, as noted by the Royal Veritable Record. It was followed by almost daily solar and lunar halos, and at least 4 large meteors observed up and down the country in the month of January and February. It was all perceived as foreboding signs, and unfortunately, it turned out as feared, and then some. The year started with a severe spring drought. It didn't rain into May. What came down instead were the bouts of heavy hails and frost that persisted into April, ruining what were planted for the year. On top of that, there was the attacks from locusts, killing off what little green left on the earth. When it finally rained in July, it was in the level of deluge. Flooding and landslides claimed many lives. For the rest of the summer, 6 major typhoons swept through the country. Just to cap this already apocalyptic year, numerous earthquakes shook up and down the country, already from January, then in February, May, August, and December, even though Korean Peninsula is normally earthquake-free. With so much natural disasters, it was a matter of course that various major plagues followed. It even seeped into royal palace and killed some members of royal family. Animals were not spared either. At least 1.6 million cows died of foot and mouth disease. For an agricultural economy that Joseon was, that meant the major loss of workforce. Storms and plagues carried on into winter, and the winter was unusually harsh too. Even Jeju Island, which normally enjoys subtropical climate, suffered 2 to 3 meters snowfall. Now the entire country was in absolute famine. Even some high-ranking government officers died either with a rampant disease or even starvation. Quite a few ministers gave up their high-ranking positions to escape from the helpless situation and plague that reached the capital. The endless catastrophe of natural disasters, diseases, and famine fundamentally unraveled the basis of the society. All sorts of desperate and horrible accounts were reported. Theft and robbery were rampant. Streets were littered with thousands of dead bodies, and the survivors scavenged around to take clothes off from the dead bodies. Parents abandoned kids. There are reported cases of young mothers dropping a child in the well or simply discarding her baby on the street, or of desperate parents tying their children to a tree and running away. Children abandoned their aging parents too. An account describes an adult son who'd been carrying his old mother on his back to beg for food, finally decided to leave his mom behind, and the old lady bursted into tears when she realized she'd been abandoned. Another account talks about a couple who were lining up for a bowl of gruel. When the exhausted husband died, even before he could finish the gruel, the wife gulped down the bowl of gruel first, regardless of the dead husband next to her, and only when she was done, bursted into tears. The most gruesome accounts are, of course, that of cannibalism. There are at least several official reports about parents eating their children, but in reality, a lot more and various forms of cannibalism would have taken place. One has to remember Joseon dynasty was founded on Confucian ideology. Social hierarchy and mutual responsibility, from king to his subjects, from parents to children, from husbands to wives, was the fundamental moral structure of the nation. But in the hell that the unprecedented sequence of disasters created, human morality went out of the window. In the normal times, any one of such incidents would have become a national scandal, but now they were just a footnote. At the end of the 2-year-long natural disasters and famine, it is estimated that at least 1 million people died. That's about 1/5 of the total population at the time. This famine was considered a bigger disaster than the war with Japan 78 years prior. The disaster of such a scale left lasting impacts. In subsequent years, there were several cult movements attracting traumatized survivors. The government enforced stricter registration system and neighborhood policing to control the population, and introduced a new taxation consisted with higher tax rate for the rich and less for the poor. Today, scientists theorize that 17th century was in so-called Little Ice Age. Various natural disasters such as drought, harsh winter, and famine were certainly not unique to the kingdom of Joseon. Now a forgotten chapter of history, but it still shows how fragile our human society really is, that our trusted system is nothing against the force of nature. And it could be a valuable lesson in the time of climate change. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. I always find there are certain brutal elements in old tales, proving how much the sensibility has changed in time. Considering the original Brother Grimm's tales are much more cruel than the versions we commonly know today, I guess it's just not the case with Korea. Despite of the usual complaints about how we've lost sense of morality and good manners in the modern time, actually the world we live in now might be much gentler than the one in the past. Probably. If you enjoyed my work, please give it a thumbs up in a comment, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. If you'd support me more directly, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account, and there's also a Super Thanks option here on YouTube for a small donation. Thank you. Happy Chuseok for you all, and I'll see you next Sunday.